Good morning, everybody. I'm Katie Fearer. I'm from the Alaska State Library, and I am recording this session for the 2022 Alaska Library Association Conference. And it's a virtual conference. This session is called Free and Easy Selective Web Archiving for Libraries. And in this case, we're talking about web archiving in a really specific kind of circumstance. And that is to support an effort to harvest and preserve specific publications, and especially serial publications that are only available online, and in particular that are available in no easily downloadable or printable format. So we're not talking about PDFs here, we're talking about publications that are published online in primarily HTML formats. They may be newsletters, annual reports of Alaska nonprofits, publications from trade associations, businesses. When I came to the Alaska State Library in 2006, I started as a serials librarian. And at that time, we had a goal of collecting most substantive publications relating to Alaska. So we would get on mailing lists for nonprofits, Native corporations, and others in Alaska to receive their publications. Well, since then, the vast majority of these publications are no longer available on paper. And although some of them are available in easily downloadable formats like PDFs, published on an organization's website, some aren't. And last year, because I do have a little bit of web archiving experience in my role as the government documents librarian at the Alaska State Library, I was asked to look at tools that I might be able to use, that the library might be able to use to harvest specific publications from Alaska organization websites. So these are just a few examples that I was working with, some publications that I could experiment with. For example, the Prince William Sound Science Center's annual report is still published, but it's now just published as a web page. First Alaskans magazine is published on the First Alaskans Institute website, but it also is not in an easily downloadable or printable format. There's no PDF. Our very own Friday Bulletin from my own division is published in, well, kind of like a blog format through a LibGuide, and that one has been a challenge to preserve. The Alaska Miner magazine is in sort of like a book reader kind of tool. There is a downloadable PDF, but it was such a good title to experiment with since it appeared in this reader that I chose to use it for this presentation. And then the Alaska State Museum's online exhibits, which are published on the museum's website, are also not in a format that can be easily downloaded or printed for preservation purposes. So these are just a few that I experimented with, and I'll show you some of these as we work through today. Here's where we are in the preservation workflow. So I'm going to be talking about one specific part of the digital preservation workflow, and that is just how do we actually capture and harvest these files. So there are other parts of the preservation workflow, storage, and security and integrity checks, ensuring a mechanism to access or replay these files. We'll talk a little bit about viewing the files, but we're not going to talk about most other parts of the preservation workflow, just tools that will help us to capture these files. So these are the tools that I'll be talking about today. I did try a couple of others, but they ended up working so poorly, I didn't think it was worth talking about them today. The Alaska State Library, so we're part of part of the state government, and it's really difficult for us to download software. I can't do it. I have to get permission to install any new application, and in particular, if it's open source software, it's very difficult to get permission to use that software. So one of the parameters I was working with was I wanted to see if there were tools out there that I could use that didn't require a software download. And it turned out there were quite a few. So the tools that I tested either were available in the cloud, or I could use them through adding an extension to my browser. However, if you do have the time and inclination to download and use some software, there are some really good free tools out there that looked, although I didn't use them myself, they looked from the screenshots and literature that I read to be pretty easy to use. And these are just some of them. Web Recorder has a desktop application. I did use the extension and it worked quite well, and I'll show that to you. There are also two others, the Web Curator tool and the Web Archiving Integration Layer, that may be available if you know just a little bit about web archiving and want to try these tools out. If you do want to find other tools, these are two places that I looked to find ones to test. So the community-owned digital preservation tool registry is pretty easy to access, and you can find tools based on the kind of files you're trying to preserve. So I was able to get a list of tools that dealt with web archiving. The International Internet Preservation Coalition is another good source, and the image that you're seeing on the right of the slide is an image from that page. So they have tools and software listed for acquisition of web archive files. All right, so at this point, I am going to go ahead and go into a live demonstration of some of the tools that I tried out. And the first one is the WordCreate extension for Chrome. All right, so to demonstrate this, I'm going to use the Prince William Sound Science Center's annual report. And the first step, really, in archiving a web page like this is just to kind of take a look and see what it looks like, how complex it is, whether there are links to other pages that I might want to capture. And so this is just a pretty standard web page. It does have these links to other parts of the website. There are also links in the page to other parts of the page. So for example, here at the top of the page, I can click this view and it will take me further down on the page to see more about this particular topic in the annual report. So it's mostly a single page, but there are links to other places on the Prince William Sound Science Center annual report. And it isn't going to always be clear whether those other parts of the website are part of this annual report. And that's one of the challenges of archiving web-based publications. Like, where does the particular publication begin and end? In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just demonstrate archiving with WordCreate. Now, I had mentioned that the tools that I tested were primarily available as extensions. I like using Chrome, so I added the extensions to my Chrome browser. In some cases, there are extensions for other browsers as well. Once I added the extensions, and the ones for Chrome are available in the Chrome Web Store, just to get them to appear in my toolbar. In Chrome, you just click on this, like, oh, it's like a puzzle piece, I guess. And then you'll see your extensions listed, and you can just click the push pin, and that will add the extension to your toolbar. So now WordCreate is this one with the green down arrow. And if I click on that, it's going to ask me to reload the page, and that's normal. So we'll do that. And then when I click on that, it will show generate work. And it's going to take a while, but I'm going to go ahead and select that option. And then it doesn't look like it's doing anything, but it probably is. And this, as it's working away, let me just describe these, what are called work files. So work stands for web archive, and it's a kind of container format. It's the preferred format for digital preservation of a website. It houses all of the various files that are part of the web page you're trying to archive. So if you've ever tried to download a web page, you probably remember it's got an HTML file. It might have image files. It might have cascading style sheets. And there are many different parts of a web page, many different files that make up a web page. And the work format will kind of house those together in one archivable file. And it will have a work extension, W-A-R-C. All right, so now if you look in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you will see that a work file was created. And I have the extension set up so that it will just go to my downloads folder. And it's got a date on it, 2022, February 15th. And the problem, one of the problems with work files is that they're difficult to view. So this is my Windows File Explorer. If I click on it, Windows isn't going to know what to do with that file, and I can't easily look at it with the applications that are installed on my computer. So the next tool that I'm going to show is an easy way to view these kinds of files. And it is entirely on the web, and it's called replayweb.page. So all I need to do in this case is navigate to my file, load it in the page, and then what's happening? So all of these different files are showing up. And these are all of the different parts of the web page that I archived. So what am I going to do in this case? If I scroll down, I will see eventually this HTML file, which looks like it was the link that I had in my browser when I was viewing that annual report from the Prince William Sound Science Center. And if I choose that one, replay web page will actually render that work file. And it looks pretty good. Here it is. Looks very much like the web page that I was viewing. I can go ahead, if I click learn more, you will see that it's not part of the archive. So likely that was a link to another part of the Prince William Sound Science Center's website. And it's not part of the page that I archived. That's one of the challenges with this tool called Work Create, is it is difficult to archive a website that has any depth to it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead on to another tool that may help in this kind of a circumstance. I'll go ahead and close these tabs in my browser, and I'm going to go ahead at this point and go to another example. And in this example, I'm going to go to Alaska Miner magazine. Okay, so this is a publication that the Alaska Miner makes available in both a PDF format, and that is the format we would choose to download and preserve. And I should mention too, as this publication is opening in my browser, that I am going to talk about rights issues. So the examples that I've shown to this point are copyrighted. And so rights issues are a concern when I am going to be harvesting the entire publication, preserving it, and then presumably making it available in the future to researchers. But I will talk about rights after I demonstrate the actual tools that I tested. Okay, so this is the Prince William Sound Science Center's magazine, and it's available in this sort of like book reader of sorts. And these are generally challenging to archive when they aren't available as a PDF, which fortunately this one is. So there is a tool that I tested, which is a little different. It's called Web Recorder, and it allows for more interactive capture. So instead of just capturing the web page that I'm looking at and perhaps all of the other pages linked from that web page, it allows me to create a web archive file as I browse. So it will capture the pages that I navigate to as I browse. And so this is can be a little more time consuming, but it also allows for much more precision in the web archive process. So I thought this one might work for a publication like this, where I need to click to turn pages. So let's see how it works. I'm going to click on this green dot with what looks like a link symbol, that kind of thing that looks like an infinity symbol. And then this small control panel will come up. It will allow me to begin recording, begin creating my web archive file. It also has this option, record to. And there are these folders that I've set up. Now this is an extension, and everything that I'm doing here is stored in my browser. If I go to the home icon in the extension, I can see what's called my current web archive. So these are folders that I've set up in the extension to house the web archive files that I create using the extension. The term archive in this case is probably a misnomer, because everything that I'm doing is stored in my browser on this computer. And until I download the files to our network here at the Alaska State Library, they're not going to be subject to my institution's normal security and backup procedures. So this is a great way to organize my work, but it is definitely not a preservation tool. Once I download these files, I'll need to do something with them to keep them safe or make them available for researchers. But this added functionality, the ability to manage the titles I might be working with through the browser, can be a useful tool if I have a small set of files that I need to harvest in this way. So back to my Alaska Miner webpage, you can see here that I could start the recordings here if I wanted, but I am not going to do that. I'm going to start the recording here, and I'm going to direct it to the Alaska Miner. And now I'm recording. You can see it's reloading the page. And then I can scroll through my pages. And I'm going to stop recording. So I haven't gone through all of the pages. In this control panel, I see a view recorded page option. This It's the same tool that I showed before, called Replay Web Page. And in this case, it's incorporated into the web recorder extension. So what I'm looking at now is the web archive file that I created through Web Recorder. And I'm turning my pages. And the interesting thing that I've learned is it seems to get 1 or 2 additional pages beyond where I have turned when I was making the recording. I'm not sure what the explanation is for that. But in order to get this entire publication through Web Recorder, I would want to turn all of the pages of the publication. So it can be a time-consuming process, but there are some cases where I've found that a tool like this is necessary to get the content that I need in a web archive file. So I'm going to go ahead and show one more thing. All right. So if I used that in the extension, I used the home icon to get back to my quote unquote archive here that is in Web Recorder. And if I want to download the file that I just created, I would select Alaska Minor, the folder to which I recorded that file, click the checkbox, and then download. And I'm able to download a file in the work format. So it doesn't work for all files, for all web pages. And to demonstrate that, let me go to First Alaskans magazine, which has been a challenge to archive. I'm going to go to the current issue, and I will try to use a web recorder for it. And this happens. I get an error message, and I'm not really sure why this is happening. Web archiving can sometimes be like, oh, I don't know, trying to catch a fish with a string or something. It is difficult sometimes to use web archiving tools to archive a web page. Sometimes errors occur and I don't know why they're occurring. Sometimes an organization can block the ability to archive a web page, but there are multiple tools available. And so I looked at this error message and thought, oh, I'll try another tool. And let me go ahead and show the next tool that I tested out. This is a completely different kind of tool. It's called single file, and it does not create a web archive file. What the single file extension will do is create a single HTML file from the web page that I'm viewing. And I'll go ahead and select it. This doesn't create really a faithful copy of the original web page. So if you remember when we were using Web Recorder and we recorded, well, actually it was when we were using Word Create and we recorded or created a copy of the Prince William Sound Science Center's annual report. It was made up of dozens of files. That is the way that that web page exists. So when I use single file to create a single copy of that web page in an HTML file, it's really fundamentally changing the makeup of that page. So it's not a great preservation tool. There may be cases where it's the only way that I can get a copy of something that I want to preserve, and it's possible it will be a useful tool in the future. So you see down here in the left-hand corner is my HTML file. When I open that, I get just this copy of the First Alaskans magazine. It's, you can see, just stored on my computer. If I select a link from it, that's going to take me to the live web. So this portion is not incorporated into the file that I created with single file. And that gives it the same kind of limitations that the War Create tool had. There was not a great amount of depth to the file that it creates, just the single page that I was viewing at the time. So it does have limited functionality for the purpose that we need at the Alaska State Library. But it's, you know, I can see that it has some utility, and I did try it out, so I thought I would share it with you. The next tool that I tried is the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine's Save Page Now functionality. So this is available through an extension or through the Wayback Machine. You can use the tool without having the extension loaded in your browser. And if I just go to the Internet Archive's main page here, I see all of their services and resources. The Save Page Now tool is available. If I just click on web here, I immediately see Save Page Now. And what the Internet Archive has done is allowed users to enter a URL and make sure that that page is captured in the Wayback Machine. So you can create an account, which I have done here. You can see my name here in the upper right corner of my screen, but you don't have to. Creating the account does allow me, and again, it's called My Web Archive. Creating an account does allow me to keep track of the things that I have caused the Internet Archive to add to the Wayback Machine. So these are the pages that I've added. Okay, for this example, I am going to go ahead and open the Friday Bulletin. This is the Alaska State Library's newsletter, and it's in a LibGuide. We have a main page listing issues, and then we have the actual issues. So I'm going to go ahead back to the November 19th issue. And here it is. And there are articles, and some of them link elsewhere, and some of them don't link elsewhere. If I want to add this to the Wayback Machine, I can copy the URL. I could also use the extension here, and I will show that in a moment. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and copy the URL, and I'm going to go ahead and click the plus sign for save and share. And then I'm going to enter the URL here in the Save Page Now function, and I can choose to save outlinks, which will cause the Wayback Machine to grab the content that is linked from that page. And in some cases, that's necessary, depending, you know, when a publication is in a blog kind of format and you see these read more buttons that will allow you to read the full article. That's really useful. Sometimes publications have a PDF attached as well, or some kind of a document attached. And if I want to save that, saving the outlinks will help. If I save it to my web archive, that'll add it to my account information. So it doesn't add the actual file to anything that I have control over other than, it is saved in the cloud. And I do see it in my Internet Archive account in the My Web Archive folder. But basically the files that I cause the Wayback Machine to archive here are entirely in the cloud. So from a preservation standpoint, that might make librarians feel a little bit queasy because we are saving something to the cloud that is controlled by the Internet Archive. It is not really my content that I am managing on my servers. But the Internet Archive has been around for decades, and it's a pretty safe spot, I think, for content. And for a lot of libraries that don't have the ability to maintain servers to house their preserved digital files, this could be a pretty good option. All right, once I enter my URL and make my selections, I save the page, and it's going to take a couple of minutes for the Wayback Machine to work through that web page and archive it and add it to the Wayback Machine. You can see it working here. So all of these files are part of that web page, and they're all getting wrapped up in a work file for preservation at the Internet Archive. Okay, so as it's finishing, you can see here that there is a URL that's created. So one of the things that the Wayback Machine will do is we'll create a persistent link to the file that I just archived. One of the important things to remember is that that is a single snapshot in time of this web page. So that link will lead to one specific capture of this issue of the Friday Bulletin. So having a persistent link is useful, and in particular, if it's a monograph or a standalone publication and I have a catalog record for it, I could add that URL to the catalog record, and a user in the catalog would be able to navigate to the archived copy on the Wayback Machine. When we're talking about serial publications, and I want to allow a user to navigate from the catalog to past and future issues of the Friday Bulletin, I'll need to use a different link. So if my goal is, every month to log on and cause the Wayback Machine to archive a particular issue of the Friday Bulletin, and then if I want users to be able to navigate to that from the catalog, I need to take them to a different page other than this specific issue. So one of the things I would want to do is also archive the Friday Bulletin's main page. And that's this one. Now I've done that in the past. I have actually, and just yesterday, I believe, entered this URL in the Wayback Machine's Save Page Now functionality as well. So if I grab that URL and then go back to the Wayback Machine and find that page in the Wayback Machine, what do I see? So I see a calendar, and this calendar represents all of the occasions where that page has been archived in the Wayback Machine. And you can see that I've been working a lot with it in February as I prepared for this session. There are also these other dates and other years where the Friday Bulletin has been archived in the Wayback Machine. It can be a little bit confusing to users, but this is a good page to link to in the catalog. If I want to allow users to get to the archived copies of the Friday Bulletin, the archived issues that are in the Wayback Machine, I would want to use this URL. And probably provide some instructions to users on how to use the Wayback Machine. So I just selected one of the dates that this page was archived. Takes a little bit of time for the page to render entirely. And then I've got these issues, and I can navigate through to them to, in the future, as the Friday Bulletin is published and new issues are added, I would be able to navigate to those future dates from this page. So this page will continue to change and will show all future captures of the Friday Bulletin homepage in the Wayback Machine. I'm going to go ahead back to the PowerPoint presentation, and I do have a slide showing how we are generally cataloging web archives. Let's see. There it is. Okay. So we do actually, in the catalog, in the Alaska Library catalog, the Alaska State Library does link to some archived websites. We have an Archive It subscription, which is another service of the Internet Archive, and we archive all state government websites. And in some cases, we do create links to specific publications that are in the Wayback Machine that have been added to the Wayback Machine as a result of our Archive It work. And the way that we do that is we reference the archived website. It is generally good practice in the link text when you're leading someone to a web archive to be, fairly specific about the fact that the person is being taken to an archived website, not a live website. And then the user will get to the calendar page and be able to navigate to specific captures of that publication. Okay, so what did I find? Of all of the tools that I used, WordCreate works well if it's a kind of a flat page. Web Recorder works well if you have a complex page and you want to get some but not all of it. Single file isn't a great preservation tool. It creates an HTML file, which is fundamentally different than the web page that you may be trying to preserve. The Internet Archive Save Page Now tool worked pretty well. I wasn't able to get, interestingly, when I archived the Prince William Sound Science Center annual report, it looked a little off. I think there was an image that somehow didn't get captured by the Internet Archives tool. For the most part, it looked pretty good. It also wasn't able to handle the Alaska Miners magazine function, the turn page functionality. So I was only able to grab the front page of that magazine using the Save Page Now feature. So basically what I found is there wasn't really a single tool that worked well for everything that I was trying to archive. But I have to say, Web Recorder and Save Page Now, between the two, seemed to get what I needed. Now, of course, like this is, as I mentioned, a single stage in the preservation workflow. So once a library is able to capture content in a web archive file, then you need to do something with it. We have a digital preservation tool at the Alaska State Library called Preservica, and it will actually render web archive files pretty well, but not all of them do. So in selecting a tool, that is a consideration. Do you have a way to easily handle and serve these files up to your patrons? If not, relying on the Wayback Machine, well, you definitely give up control over those files. It can be a satisfactory solution for a small number of files that you are syncing to preserve. All right, I had mentioned that I would talk about rights. I think we've talked about, let's skip over this because I think I've talked about that. Okay, so rights issues. So copyright law does apply to websites. Section 108, which has some library-specific provisions in it, does not specifically cover web harvesting. So there was I don't know if anyone remembers the Section 108 study group, but I think it was over a decade ago that there were recommendations made for updating the Copyright Act, amending the Copyright Act, and part of the study group's report does cover what they call publicly available online content, basically web content. And the recommendation was to amend the Copyright Act to cover that kind of content. And the reasoning is here, and this is directly from the report itself. Web content is often ephemeral. It's generally not available for sale. Clearing rights can be cumbersome. The content is already out there, so the adverse effects on right holders are pretty small. And so the study group did recommend that libraries be able to capture it and provide access on the premises and be made available remotely after a period of time has elapsed, and if it's marked an archive copy. There were recommendations to allow opt-out in some cases. And so what are libraries doing? What are we doing here at the Alaska State Library? Well, this particular session involved a really specific kind of scenario, and that is these born digital publications that we used to collect on print now aren't available in print, and we want to just grab a copy of it for preservation. So we are doing this already for PDFs. We've been printing PDFs once they became available only as digital files on the website, and an organization stopped mailing the publication out. We would do kind of an analysis with our collection development policy and figure out if we wanted to go through the process of printing something for the collection, or now that we have a digital preservation system, downloading and adding that publication to our digital preservation system. And we have a kind of a process already in place to get permission from publishers when we are going to systematically harvest these publications every week, every month, or every year in the case of annual reports. And so it's natural for us to just continue with that process. And we've found some pleasant side effects, really. In most cases, these are Alaska-based organizations, and they're small, often nonprofit, and they're really excited to know that we're going to be preserving their publications. And frequently, there really isn't a need at all for us to either just serve them up on site. Frequently, the organizations we're talking with want us to make them as widely available as we can. And so the other nice side effect is once they know that we are undertaking this effort to preserve their publications, we've had organizations then just reach out to us whenever they have a new substantive publication that they think we might want. And so we learn of new content that way. And it can be time consuming to maintain these relationships, but just getting on the phone or starting an email conversation to ask for permission to harvest something on an ongoing basis can lead to these really good relationships and discovery of new information that we want or need to preserve. There is, I found, this was just this morning, a really useful research guide. And these are all useful sources and ones that I used to put together this presentation. But this, talking about intellectual property rights, this research guide from the Yale University Library has a list of different institutions and the consent approaches that they're taking to web archiving. And some of them do actually use some of the processes that were described in the Section 108 study group, like, for example, making the web archive content inaccessible widely for a certain period of time, like an embargo period, asking for consent to archive. There are also links to some other articles about rights issues and web archiving. So it's a useful page if you want to read more up on intellectual property rights as they relate to web archiving. Okay. So that is it for today. I will be posting the slides for this session on the conference website in Whova. So you'll be able to access the slides, and the recording itself will be available for, well, I'm not really sure how long these recordings are going to be available. If you have questions and you'd like to ask me those questions, feel free to email or call. And this is my contact information. I appreciate you spending the time today to listen to the recording. And that's all for today. Thank you.